Hello everybody, welcome to a bit of a tutorial kind of thing that I wanted to kind of show you guys some sort of demythologize the process of music making a little bit, talk a little bit about what I do when I make tracks, and today we're going to talk about drums and what it means to mix drums. So, the first step in getting a drum sound of any kind is to have either live drums or synthetic drums, electronic drums. In this case, we're going to go with the latter because it's a bit simpler to work with this kind of stuff. There's a couple programs I like to use. Everything's going to cost a bit of money, unfortunately. Uh, Something I've been using recently to play with drums a little bit is the Steven Slate drum sampler. It's incredible program. So I'm going to load it up here in this MIDI track in Ableton. And you see we have a whole bunch of stuff here. Uh, but really, all this is we can build our own drum kit whichever way we want. And I have a couple I designed for myself. I have a jazz brush kit, and I have a metal kit. We're going to be using just a fairly standard one. We're going to use just the first one you pick up when you see this program. What does classic absolute rock sound like? Well, you get this kick drum, this snare, these toms. Those sound really nice, actually. I really like those. It's new maple. Okay. Get this ride, these two crashes, this china, this splash, and this hi-hat. I'm not going to explain to you what everything here does in the drum set. I'm not here to tell you how to write a drum part. I'm more here to tell you how to mix the drum part you already have written down. And luckily, with the Steven Slate sampler program, they have a whole bunch of pre-written grooves we can work in, so I don't even have to write anything for you, even though I could. So let's go ahead and let's open up a groove. Let's do a rock groove, and let's let's preview it. I don't want to shuffle. Let's do this. Oops, that's the wrong one. Okay, let's put that in. Drag it over to Ableton. Gonna click no on this. And we're gonna unclip that. So now what we're gonna do is we're going to just hear it through, and we're gonna close this real quick. We're gonna look at it in Ableton. We're gonna really zoom in. So I already have this section pre-looped in Ableton. That's Control L, so I can do this and it will loop. But you can also click this button up here. So I have a whole bunch of stuff going on here. There's hats, there's a snare, and there's bass. There's no tom, unfortunately. So let's add a fill at the end of it. Let's go ahead and write a fill in. Let's get rid of these two and make sure this is selected so I can hear them. And let's do a very simple. Yeah, cool. So now we have that going on. We have a full groove here, and we're gonna get rid of that. Shift tab, get out of that view with the piano roll. We don't need to be writing anything extra there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select specific instruments in the sampler and have them go out to different outputs. So what that means is that we're going to be sending the snare to a different place, the kick to a different place, all of the toms to the same place, and all of the cymbals to the same place. Typically, you would actually do the toms by themselves if you were mixing a real live drum set, but in my experience, it's simpler and easier just to. You could do each of them individually, but let's keep it simple. Usually, I had to simplify it and put them all on the same track because they're all getting the same effects anyway. You could be doing different EQs with them, and we'll get into that here in a second. But let's go ahead and we're going to put our kick out two, our snare two out three, tom 1, 2, 3, and 4 to out 4, and all of our cymbals we're going to go to out 5. And there is a reason I'm putting all of them on the same out. So yeah, they're all going to be going to the same place. And a room overhead room, I also tend to put out, you could put it to a different one. I'm going to put it to the same one with the cymbals because I want the same effect on that. You could do the same different one. Some cases you do want the same one. This is more just generalizing, like what's the least amount of effort I can do. So now what we're going to do is we're going to insert an audio track. And we're going to, instead of doing an external in, we're going to go SSD sampler. Going to go to output 2. And you notice it's lighting up, but there's nothing, you don't hear anything. You have to click in. And suddenly we can hear a kick drum. So we're going to do that same process for the 3 tracks we wanted. We got that. And I'm going to rename these. I'm going to rename them to kick. I'm going to rename this guy to snare. I'm going to rename this guy to toms. And I'm going to rename this guy to OH, which is short for overhead. So everything's there, it's just not coming from this specific track anymore, it's coming from these guys. That's where the actual sound comes in. But we aren't doing anything weird where we're having to literally duplicate the track and select the MIDI notes by themselves. We can just do an out and do it this way. That's going to make editing it a lot easier too, and I'm going to go ahead and color code all this stuff to the same color as well. This nice bright red. So now we're in a position where we can put on effects to our drums to make them sound a bit more punchier. They already sound pretty good out of the box, but when you're doing it in a mix, it can tend to be very low, and so to bring it up, we would want to put more effects on it. So let's go ahead and let's identify which ones we're going to do. I'm going to go to audio effects. I have some pre-built ones. I have one for kick, overhead, snare, and toms. We're going to go in order with the ones we got here. Let's go through the kick one. So immediately you can see I don't have a lot of effects on here because you don't really need a lot of effects. What I have is an EQ and a compressor. Now, what a compressor is, kind of a topic for a different time. But typically, you want compression on all of your drum tracks, no matter what. The only one I would say doesn't need compression all the time is your overheads, or your cymbals. But typically, you want compression on everything because you need that kind of firmness and that punch to it that you only really get from the compression. Now, what I have here is I have Smash and Grab, which is a specifically drum compressor made for drum mixing. It is an incredible piece of software that I love to death. You can pre-select whatever drum you want. So I could have it, I didn't mean to do that. You can have it be a kick compression, a snare compression, tom compression, room compression, overhead compression, or parallel compression, which is its own nasty little thing that doesn't, I mean, it does matter, but it's not something I ever bother with, and I feel like my mixes still sound pretty okay. That's more for like the engine, like the super granular engineering types. My experience, but this is just like general. Like I just wrote a song. How the heck do I do this? So this is nice because you already have something built in for you. And the best advice I can give when dialing in any tone is just to mess around with every single knob. Mess around with everything, see what works for you, and you should be hearing a difference no matter what. Now, in terms of EQ, what I do with my kick drum specifically is that I get rid of a lot of the low end. You can see here, because that's where the bass guitar typically lies, and I want a little bit of that low frequency, but I don't want everything that low frequency, because the bass guitar still needs room to chug 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 along. I do the same thing with my guitars, but it doesn't taper off. It tapers off sharper in my guitars than it does with my drums. There's still a little bit of that low end, but it's still getting cut off because like I said, we want to leave the room for the bass to live in low frequency land. So here's the bass drum by itself. We'll do it before and after. So this is before the effect. And this is after. And honestly, I might mess around with it even more because this was a compressor built for that I dialed in for a different bass drum tone. Just happens to work pretty universally. But I might mess around with it a little bit more if I were going to fully develop the sound into something I would enjoy because I can already hear this isn't exactly what I want with my bass drum sound. I can already kind of hear that. No, that's the bass drum. Now let's go ahead and talk about that snare drum effects rack I have. So again, very simple, only three effects. We have a compressor again, same compressor but doing a different thing. We have the EQ again, same kind of idea, but uh, leaving a lot of the mids, whereas in the kick drum we kind of scoop those down and leaving a lot of the high end there. And then we also have a slight reverb to it, and I'm a sucker for reverb on drums. Anytime I dial in a tone with drums, I almost instinctually put reverb on there. It's not necessary, but it is something that I always like to have. It just makes it feel a bit more powerful if you got like the right reverb on it. And I should say too, my EQ and my reverb are all stock plugins with Ableton. These are the stock effects that come with the program. They aren't necessarily the best, but they are certainly there. And I'll be honest, I probably need to shell out the cash for a better reverb, but it's I just spent like $100 on drums, so I'm good for now. But let's do a bit of comparison, and again, same thing here. Uh, I can't remember exactly what the smash versus the grab does in here. I'm blanking on like what specifically it does, but it does produce a different sound. So like I said, just mess around with the dial. Make sure like it helps if you have it on the right drum type too. But just messing around with it, kind of seeing how it goes. My only advice really is if you want like a tone that's more in line with the original signal, you can always mess around with the wetness and dryness of it. Which this is the wet dry kind of knob right here. I pretty much always have mine at 100 because I can already hear the original signal pretty well in here. But like I said, just mess around with it. The compressor should be doing most of the work. You shouldn't have to do too much work with dialing. And like I said, it's all to personal preference. Just use your ears. Use your ears. So let's hear what a snare sounds like without the effect. And then with the effects, yeah. So now let's go ahead and let's put on those tom effects I got going on here. You can see, once again, I have general compression with the smash and grab. My beautiful, beautiful smash and grab. Uh, EQ, this time we're not cutting any of the lows, because I want that booming sound with the tom. And we're actually cutting off a little bit of the high frequency, and raising up those mids, because like I said, I want that kind of booms kind of sound. And then there's actually more reverb on the toms than on my snare, because like I said, I want them to ring out as long as possible. So let's do the same test we did before and after. We can just actually skip to the end. And then after. You can hear the boom in there. That's my my cold, dead, jazz-loving heart coming through. I love a boomy tom. No, the last one we got going on here is our overheads or our cymbals. And I have an overhead thing here. You'll notice the compression is a little bit less dialed in here. It's still pretty prevalent, but there's not a whole lot there's not like too much specifically going on here. I want like a kind of a lighter tone. You see there's a lot of this air, which produces a bit of that lighter substance to the sound that makes it sound a bit more frilly. Gives it a lot more weight to it as opposed to like really crunching it down and making it last a little bit less longer, like the other compressors kind of tend to do. Is like they kind of crunch it together, make sure it's all nice and good. But of course we still need that compression on there, and of course I have it set to overheads, and then I don't have an EQ on this because I want all the range of frequencies to be super prevalent because we have a whole bunch of different stuff happening, and I just have a straight reverb on this. It's actually, it is more. Okay, I thought it was less than my toms, but no. It's the same amount. No, not the same amount. It's a little bit more than my toms because, like I said, I want this to really be kind of frilly, and this should be the most kind of spacious thing that you hear. Now, I want to talk about why I have this all on one track as opposed to having each individual cymbal its own track and like getting really granular with it. And like you could do that. You could definitely do that. It's just a thing of like when you mic drums in the real world, 9 times out of 10 you're not miking every cymbal. You're miking something called overhead mics, which are two mics that you put on a stand or have them hanging if you're really fancy, and you just have them over all of the drums. And what those overhead mics jobs is to capture all of the high frequencies of the cymbals and push that through. Because all the drums are mic'd individually, but the cymbals are not typically. Typically, the only cymbal you'd really mic by itself is the hi-hat. So what I do when I'm thinking about like mixing this stuff is like I'm thinking about how would I mix this if this were just like a multi-track, waveform of drums. I would put like I would get overhead, and I would actually probably, because there's usually two overheads, I would actually pan them left to right, and you can definitely do that. Again, this is just kind of how we typically always do it. If I wanted to go overkill with this and really like, okay, no, Tom 1 has to be 47 panned left, and in Tom 4 has to be 50 panned right. No, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna keep it pretty similar, and I'm pretty sure most drum programs like the Slate drums auto pan that stuff for you anyway, so it's not too big of a deal. And even then, it doesn't really matter. It just creates a bit of ear candy when you're listening with headphones or with good stereo speakers. But I've been talking a lot. Let's go ahead and hear the same thing we did before. Before Now, Sky, I hear you crying in the streets. Why can I hear some of the drums? And that's because the overhead mics. The overhead mics do capture everything. They capture everything there. Their job is to mainly catch the cymbals, and they do that quite well, but they still catch all of the drums. So a part of mixing drums is kind of working with imperfection, because you're never just going to have the snare mic be on the snare and not pick up the hi-hat, you know? It's always going to be catching multiple things. Its job is to capture one main thing. And luckily with stuff like this, we can really, secularize what's going on with the mix. But in order to keep some of that spirit of like live mixing there, I like to put my overheads through the same channel as my cymbals just to make sure that like it's authentic to what it would be like if I were to play this on a real kit and record it. So that's before. And this is after. And that's part of the reason the reverb is so important to overheads, is because it's almost like an additive effect to the actual drums that's happening. So let's do a big old thing. So let's, one last time, listen to this groove with no effects. And then we're going to listen to it with all the effects going on. Yeah, it's not for everybody, and some people really like that dry snare sound. The reverb isn't for them. But for me, that reverb really makes the snare drum stand out. So that's kind of my quote unquote tutorial about mixing drums. Hopefully, this was useful, maybe a little bit. Uh, I know I use like two programs in here that didn't come with my DAW. So that's the Smash and Grab and the Steven Slate drums. Both I recommend for anybody who's wanting to start mixing any kind of music, really. Slate drums are great. Even if you have live drums, you can trigger them to be Slate drums, and it's really simple. And Smash and Grab is just perfect for not even drum mixing. It's just a generally really good compressor. I've used it on vocals I think a couple of times, and it's not turned out bad. It was weird, but it wasn't bad. But yeah, no, that's about everything. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you whenever I need to kill more time and talk about guitar, maybe.